Good morning. Today we're going to be drinking my coffee and watching a video about why Yu-Gi-Oh guides don't work. This was recommended to me by someone in my Discord channel. Thank you. If you want to recommend me content or just chit chat, make sure you check out my Discord in the link below. I did admittedly basically just roll out of bed to make this video. Can I show you my choice in jammies? Because I didn't realize what I look like. I look like Clifford. It wasn't intentional to wear all red. And I put it on last night and I was like, why do I look like Clifford? I haven't had my coffee yet, by the way. This video should get more coherent the more I drink of my coffee. Anyway, let's get into it. Let's watch this video about why Yu-Gi-Oh guides don't work.
So, as always, I've been thinking a lot about Yu-Gi-Oh recently, and so I've got a new premise to share with you guys. Basically, it's the idea that I think modern Yu-Gi-Oh guides, how to play, tutorials, are just not working.
Right off the rip, I'm going to let you know that I fully agree with that, because when I was first learning to play Yu-Gi-Oh, I was getting sent flowcharts. Especially the official guides that are out there, and then trying to find guides that are useful that cover like the basics, because the thing is, like, I came from playing Pokemon, I came from playing Magic, I knew TCGs, but I didn't know like monster, spell, trap, and then there's all these different types and all these different types of summons, and it was extremely overwhelming. And a lot of the guides that were available either assumed I knew those things when I didn't, or were just so viciously unhelpful. I think it's a feat in itself that I even learned anything about Yu-Gi-Oh.
And it's complicated, so we're going to get into it. This one's a little bit unstructured. I've got a lot of thoughts and ideas and maybe even like a project that I have in mind that I'll get to toward the end of the video. But yeah, I wanted to share it and just get you guys' opinions. So basically, we have to go through the usual premise that starts off so many of these discussions, which is that Yu-Gi-Oh is a uniquely challenging game to play. It is a tough game to learn. It is a tough game to improve at, to, execute on, compete in, all of that stuff. It doesn't resemble its older incarnations. It's a really tough game to return.
So I started learning to play in 2025. I will say that since I've never played the older versions of Yu-Gi-Oh, it's been wild to hear like when Link summons were first announced, and like I literally just learned about what old Link summoning was 4 days ago. And so I have spoken to people who have played Yu-Gi-Oh in the past, and they don't play it currently because it just got so convoluted. So I definitely can't speak to what it would be like to have played in the past and then trying to learn how to play now, because I jumped right in modern Yu-Gi-Oh 2025.
It can be really fun and gratifying when you learn all of that and when it all comes together, but obviously the on-ramp isn't always there. So there are plenty of existing, Yu-Gi-Oh guides and tutorials. Konami released the 2-player starter deck a couple of years ago. This is a product that I don't personally love very much, but it exists. It's got 2 decks. It's got like the whole guided gameplay tutorial with the rule book, and it doesn't, in my opinion, represent much of what modern Yu-Gi-Oh really looks like in action, but it does explain the very fundamental rules reasonably well. There's also a guide in Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, where it's similarly...
So I've never played Master Duel. I've never played online simulators. I do think it's something I'm working up to it. My logic was, okay, so a little background information about me too, so you understand where my thoughts on this are coming from. I am a teacher. I'm a certified educator, master's degree, 10-year teacher. Okay. So I believe that when you are trying to learn or teach something, you have to leave room for the mistakes. You have to leave room for the self-correction, right? And my thing with Master Duel is I've never played it, but I've heard that it like doesn't let you do the illegal plays. So if you picture like a student who's multiplying wrong, if you just go up and you're like, that's wrong, it's supposed to be 48, you take away the learning opportunity, right? Versus asking leading questions and getting them to be like, oh, okay, I multiplied wrong. So that's my thing with Master Duel. With the other ones, it was more of like I had no skill sets. Like it felt like going into the ones that don't autocorrect you would be like jumping into the deep end, where I'm like, I'm not going to make someone sit through playing against me, and like I don't even know what is happening in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh. But I've never played any of the online sims. I have just strictly been playing in person,
where it's similarly kind of just a series of guided tutorials about things like normal summoning and activating spells and traps and the battle phase and stuff like that. And of course, there are loads of videos on YouTube that are like how to play Yu-Gi-Oh in, insert current year, how to get started with Yu-Gi-Oh. I've made a few myself. Plenty of people have made them. But I think that the problem that I guess I'm getting to here is I don't know that any of these are really teaching people like what a game of Yu-Gi-Oh looks like. Like so often people will watch these or read these things or buy these things and still sort of feel like they're thrown in the deep.
Okay, so what I will say, here's my 2 cents as to why I think that the guides that are out there are not preparing people for a game of Yu-Gi-Oh. It's because it's you have to like chunk information, right? So like in education, it's called like chunking, it's called scaffolding, meaning if I'm teaching fractions, right? I'm teaching how to add fractions. You don't just jump in with adding fractions. You have to teach what a numerator is, what a denominator is. Like you have to teach what a fraction is. And then you have to teach multiples because you're going to have to do least common multiple. So away from fractions, you teach how to find multiples, and then you teach least common multiples, and then you tie that back into. It's like a lot, and it's a lot of practice. It's a lot of practicing step by step by step, so you feel successful and you can add a fraction. Yu-Gi-Oh, I feel like just the general game, there's not a way to practice the smaller steps. So I feel like there's people who really enjoy Genesis. And then when I try to think about like, why they enjoy Genesis, but they won't touch advanced, normally when I've talked to them, it's because they feel like they get curb stomped in advanced, right? And it's like, okay, well, why is that? Because you can know all the mechanics. You can know enough mechanics to play a format like Genesis or, I've never played Edison or Go or any of those formats, but I feel like you can know the mechanics to play those. But when you get to advanced, knowing the mechanics is not helpful because you haven't been able to practice like all of the things that go into advanced in smaller chunks. You just sit down and you get curb stomped. Learning Yu-Gi-Oh, the amount of tears that I still cry, it's so frustrating. It's so frustrating to go and like sit down in front of someone and then they just absolutely like decimate you. So I really think the bigger issue is that like things are not chunked in a way that people can understand them, but also there's not like ways for people to practice those chunks before they go to like actually play a game.
In when they get tossed into the Master Duel ladder or when they get thrown at a local tournament or whatever at the card shop. And so I was thinking to myself, okay, what is it that these guides aren't really doing right? Or how are they maybe, I don't want to say misrepresenting Yu-Gi-Oh, but what are we getting wrong? What's not resonating with people? And of course, this could vary from person to person. Some people learn in different styles, it takes different amounts of time, different approaches, whatever. But I do think that these rule books and stuff sort of feel like they're just limited. And so the first thought that I had is I feel like a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh guide material has to cover a certain amount of the basics, right? Like, here's what a monster card is, here's what a spell card is, here's what a trap is. This is the monster's level, this is, the monster's attack point.
I still get confused between attribute and type, right? Like there are, yes, that is something, especially if you're speaking to someone who's never played Yu-Gi-Oh, that does have to get covered.
And here's kind of how battle works. Like if two monsters attack each other and you subtract the difference in their blah, 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 and that's how many life points. You have to cover stuff like that. That stuff is, for better or worse, it's just necessary. That's how Yu-Gi-Oh works. That much at least has not really changed. But I think that where the problems come in is that so little of the whole like a quick play spell means you can be activated here and there, like a set a trap. So much of that doesn't translate to modern Yu-Gi-Oh because modern Yu-Gi-Oh is A, very fast, like these things are going to be thrown at you quickly. B, varies heavily from deck to deck. Different decks have such different game plans that it's tough to really take one concept and just be able to apply it easily. And then C, even just the structure of a turn and phases and maybe even old concepts like card economy just don't apply. So some examples. I think that monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh really can sort of be broadly divided into things like starter cards or extender cards or board breakers or hand traps rather than really just like a monster with attack.
I mean, yeah, I can see that point too, because like when you're introduced and you're like, oh, it's a monster, and then you're like, oh, it's an ash blossom, I can normal summon it, and then it's like, well, you really don't want to, unless you're going into Almirage, unless you know what I mean. Like there is a lot of variation, and so trying to teach people like the purpose of monsters like is good. Of like, okay, this is something that's going to like a hand trap versus a monster that you normal summon. I think like but then you also have to touch with all the extract monsters, and so that's where it gets convoluted.
Attack points. So when was the last time that you've really thought about attack points as like this major threat of a monster? Sure, if a monster has high attack, that's a good thing,
Firewall.
but
Want to make the
rarely do
neotype and
decks like run
spiral the
into some
third.
problem where they can't swing over or something, right? So it sometimes feels like maybe these guides are overemphasizing those really rudimentary elements without talking instead about like, I guess I'm imagining a framework where we view cards more as like how they need to be interacted with. So take
Okay, I'm gonna stop him right there. I'm gonna let him speak. I'll let him explain it. But my immediate, when I heard the word interaction, I was like, that is, in my opinion, that is exceptionally complicated. That is the thing that I still, right? I've been playing for Yu Gi Oh for almost a year, and I feel like I have the basics down. I feel like I'm understanding my punctuation. I got it. I can play a game of Yu Gi Oh, not get completely curb stomped. Interaction, because interaction requires that you not only know what you're doing, and when you're first learning Yu Gi Oh, I feel like so much of your cognitive space, right? Your working memory is going towards does this card do? What does this card do? What comes next in the combo I practiced? What am I searching for? Is this a legal play? Is this an illegal? Like I still misplay all the time, y'all. Like there's still a lot of cognitive effort that's going towards just like what do my cards do? Interaction requires that you have freed up the cognitive space to now think about what your opponent is doing and what are their cards and how can I interact with that. That is a higher level of like cognition basically, that I think for teaching, I feel like if you went into teaching me and were like, hey, interaction, like I would be like, what, I barely know what I'm doing. How am I expected? I still feel that way. So there's some games where I'm like, I barely know what I'm doing. How am I supposed to know what you're doing? But I'm curious what he means by that.
for instance, a card like an elemental hero Stratos. So many cards have a Stratos in their archetype in some form or fashion. This card where like when it's normal or special summoned, you can add thing from deck to hand or special summon thing from deck or send thing from deck to grave. And basically you could almost say that these are the cards that are begging to be
I will say if someone picks a deck that they're trying to learn, I do think that's a good piece of advice of like going over like what's like the gimmick, right? Like with Malice Monsters, they banish, you pay the LP, they come back because that helps you save time on reading and start compartmentalizing so you don't have to memorize every card. You just have to be like, oh, the Malice Monsters all do this thing. So it that does help you free up some working memory.
ash blossomed. And so they're all starter cards in some capacity. They're usually monsters. They usually have that general type of text, but that's not something that a rule book is ever going to say. A Konami rule book isn't going to really say, these are starter cards. Look out for your opponent's starter cards. And people will hear about maybe hand traps, but they won't hear about how to use the hand traps. And we know that hand
Okay, I feel like this is less about like really like teaching someone the game of Yu-Gi-Oh, and this is more teaching someone how to not get absolutely decimated in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh. I feel like this is kind of where I'm at in my like learning journey of like trying to figure out starting to have the ability to think about what my opponent is doing, what deck they're playing, what their starter cards are, what is worth hand trapping, because that's the thing is like you can hand trap, and if you hand trap wrong, like I've played into decks where I'm like, oh haha, I'm going to ash your search, and then it like literally does absolutely nothing in terms of them making their full board and just wombo comboing on me.
traps in Yu-Gi-Oh are kind of the necessary evil that you need to learn to master if you want to fight for your turn in this game, right? If your opponent is able to play the game unchecked, they will make a huge board. They will lock you out of being able to do basically
Mastering hand
anything, and you will
traps
lose
is
and you will
like
be angry.
I feel like such a high
And
level
so
thing.
you'll hear maybe
Fractions,
online, okay, run Ash Blossom,
calculus,
run Imperms, run Ghost Ogres and DD Crows
learning
and
Yu-Gi-Oh,
Dominus whatever and Nibiru.
mastering hand
And
traps.
just like people will sort of hear that and throw all these hand traps in their deck, but still be basically just as lost. I've observed this.
Perfect point though. That is a perfect point that it's like, oh, you just have to hand trap it. It's like what I said earlier. If you hand trap wrong, um, it doesn't matter. And that is the thing where I feel like, especially playing Malice when I've been going to locals, not everyone remembers like what Malice like does. Like that's the thing. Is like the more you play against a deck, the more you know what it does, the more you know where it's like if I hit that card, that's gonna make a difference. But that's what I'm saying. Like that's I feel like a very high level concept versus like when I was learning and needed guides for how to play Yu-Gi-Oh! And I was just being like, what's a field spell? You know, like I just still recently learned that if a field spell's activation gets negated, it goes to grave. Like there's just so much that is like so much of the mechanics of Yu-Gi-Oh that yes, like would it have been good? I think I would have cried less had I had access to guides that could have shown me how to better interact with my opponent but I feel like I also wasn't ready for that for a really long time.
When I've tried to teach people or when I've encountered people who are sort of learning Yu-Gi-Oh for the first time. And so I think that maybe a better way to view this all would be like how to identify what a starter card is. Every Yu-Gi-Oh deck has got its own game plan, like I said, and is trying to do different things, but I think that they can all sort of, you can coalesce a lot of things down to most decks have a starter card. The starter card itself will look a little different, function slightly differently, but you can always find these like common threads of like, okay, whether it's Odeon, the man with the mark, that's kind of the starter card, or maybe it's, Radiant Typhoon Eldum, right? I'm playing a Radiant Typhoon deck, so my examples are kind of pulling from that. But any deck has these. This could be, your Tearlament's Rhino Heart. This could be your Cupsy Yummy. This could be, in some cases, maybe Fiendsmith Tract or something like that.
Yeah, like every deck has their starter, but I feel like that takes so much experience to figure out. Like you have to figure out like what other people are playing and have a bunch of experience in order to even start calculating that. And if you're sitting in the game still trying to figure out like, when I was like activating a quick play spell that wasn't sat on my opponent's turn because I was like, it's a quick play spell. It's like an instant in Magic. And they're like, nah, you got to set it first. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like this is definitely more of like an intermediate, like he's talking more about like intermediate guides, like how to be better at the game once you kind of know the game.
That. And so I think that players should maybe be taught to recognize those qualities in cards because whether you know what your opponent's deck is doing entirely or not, it is still helpful to be able to identify, okay, that's probably the starter card. So that's what I should probably be ashing or imperming or veiloring or whatever when it pops up, right? Okay. Next, there's like things like extenders. There's things like board breakers. Of course, I've already sort of talked about hand traps. It would be really good, I think, for people to learn Yu-Gi-Oh in those terms because that's what you're really actually up against when you play modern Yu-Gi-Oh. When you play modern Yu-Gi-Oh, you're not really like you pick up a card and you look at its attack points or its level, but those things so rarely do they.
I still get confused what an attribute and the level is. Like I still, like yes, admittedly you pick up the card. It took me so long because I would watch people pick up cards and I didn't know what they were doing, and so then I would like mimic the behavior and I'd pick up the card and be like, yes, I put it down. No concept of what was happening.
Feel important, right? What really feels important is like, do I need to negate this or not? Do I need to interact with this or not? Should I allow this monster to resolve its effect or not? And because there are so many decks, you can't truly know. Like some degree of Yu-Gi-Oh is just getting out there and like losing to a lot of decks and Master Duel Ladder, or going to locals and getting stomped. But I think that it would help.
Yeah, like I think so much of it is experience, and as an autistic, anxious human who also has a lot of tea time drama around one of the locals in my area, it's why I need to get on Master Duel. I know I need to do online simulators because it's going to get me more practice, and like you can't make up for a lack of practice, right? Like you're not just going to like out theory your way. You're not going to theory your way out of actually getting practice in the game, but I just think it's really hard to want to get in the practice because like you spend all this time, right? So like the metaphor I think of when I was learning to play Yu-Gi-Oh, it's like you're learning how to drive and you watch the videos and you take the classes and you're ready, okay? And you finally you get the keys, you get in the car, you're ready, you're driving to Sonic, you're picturing the milkshake, you're excited, you turn the car on and a train just absolutely decimates you and you didn't even get to back out of the driveway and now you're crying. Like that's how playing Yu-Gi-Oh felt, of like it just, you need the practice, but who wants to every time? Like, can you imagine if you didn't know if every time you started the car, if the train was going to come and hit you? The fear that you start building of like, do I start the car or is the train coming? Like, and it also like sucks the fun out of it. Like it was really hard because it's like, I would be like, I was so excited for this and I thought this was going to be fun. I wanted my Sonic milkshake and instead I got a freight train and it was not fun. And so while like, yes, practice is needed, I think that's like a whole other conversation about how you practice and being able to like, that's what I'm saying. I think if we could like piecemeal a game of Yu-Gi-Oh into smaller sets, right? You learn the basics and then you just practice certain things. I just had the thought though, like where I was very stubborn because I wanted to play the game of Yu-Gi-Oh. Like I think if someone honestly had recommended like, let's just, practice this one thing, I'd be like, no, teach me the game of Yu-Gi-Oh. But obviously when you get curb stomped, it is Terrible feeling.
For more of these guides to approach Yu-Gi-Oh from the perspective of like quickly identifying common aspects of cards so that you know how to deal with them. Some other things that have been sort of swimming around in my
That would
head
help
are
you get less curb stomped, which might make you
like
feel
sort of
that it would make you feel
sometimes
better about the
guides
game.
will focus on the idea of card economy. And I think that in modern Yu-Gi-Oh, card economy has kind of gotten thrown out of whack. It's not to say that it doesn't matter per se, but it's more like so card economy used to be if I use Smashing Ground on your monster, that's a one for one trade. If I use Mystical Space Typhoon on your spell trap, that's probably a one for one trade. But if you're somehow able to chain your spell trap, like say it's a jar of greed,
Automatically, I can tell you, yeah, that was a really hard thing being a Magic player, um, because I feel like in Magic, the one for one trade, the one for two, the figuring out, like, um, worked. It was easier, and like I would try to do that, and then going into Yu-Gi-Oh, that was a really tough habit to break because I'd be like, but I Ash Blossomed it. They still full combo. Like you have to. It's not always going to be a one for one or a one for two, like because there's you have to hit the deck at the right point in order for it to ever make a difference, and that's a really hard skill to learn. And I feel like that's what he's talking about, is it's like it's that like next level skill that no one talks about. Like you can know all the mechanics and sit down for a game, doesn't mean that it's going to be fun for you or that you're going to be able to feel like you even got to play the game, or you're going to not feel confused or like you got thrown into the deep end. And so, like, how do we address that part? How do we address the part of like, I've watched the guides, I know what my cards do, I'm ready to start actually sitting down and playing, and then you sit down and play, and you're just immediately overwhelmed.
or whatever, then you can turn that interaction into a plus one. Or Pot of Greed is just a natural plus one, or whatever. And so, like, people will sometimes, if you've played a lot of older Yu-Gi-Oh players, they'll view trades in terms of like card economy. If you can trade one card for two, that's really good. If you can trade one for one, that's pretty good. If you're going neg one, that's pretty bad. But in Yu-Gi-Oh, like modern Yu-Gi-Oh today, a lot of that has, like I said, it's gone out the window. So when you ash a card or imperm a card or have to use effect failure or some hand trap to interact with a card, it's usually going to be a neg one. A lot of these like neg one hand traps though are necessary. You do need to ash this card. It's still going to stay in the field probably if it's a monster, but you might just have to ash it. And so you have to almost view hand traps as these things that are necessary negative ones in card economy because you still need them
But see, like that's also the missing piece of like, where do you ash it, right?
to
Like
fight
knowing
for
where to
your
ash.
turn and get the ability to play your turn out and not just have your opponent combo off and do whatever they want. So really you're using hand traps as defensive tools against like your opponent's push, not so much like with the expectation that each individual hand trap will just totally pay for itself. The way that hand traps pay for themselves is in the broader aspect of like slowing what your opponent does and limiting the board that they can build so that you get a realistic chance of being able to play again when the turn comes back to you. Now, that isn't to say that card economy can't still sort of be a factor, right? Like, I think it always feels juicier to ash on a Signet Mining than it does to maybe Ash Blossom a
Yeah, don't
just
ash
some
my
monster that
kiss
got
cat
normal summoned. So it's still
without having the
there,
allure
but
in
like
hand
the concept
anyway.
overall, I think would be like, I would tell people,
Yeah,
or maybe
sometimes
just not
it's a
mention the
better,
idea of
again, a
card
better
economy in the
place
same
to
way at
ash
all, because
versus.
it just doesn't feel like it's like that's something that just hasn't translated so well. And then similarly, card advantage can kind of explode out of a single card. So we always talk about one card combos in Yu-Gi-Oh and like bridge cards and stuff where basically, if a single card can make a board, right? Like normal summoning Snake Eye Ash was always the age-old example, but there are a lot of cards today that function in a very similar manner. Mitsurugi cards, Yummy cards, a Canine card. Like a whole board can be made off of just one card that like summons itself, searches a spell trap, the spell trap searches another thing, the thing summons, and blah blah blah. Right? Like it means that basically because you can in theory use like a lot of hand traps, like I could use four different hand traps to completely just sort of stall your turn, and then if the last card in my hand happens to be the one card starter that does my whole combo, then none of the losses before meant anything, if you kind of get where I'm going with this. But again, none of that really seems to get conveyed in like these how to play Yu-Gi-Oh things. Like when people are telling you what a synchro monster is or how to synchro summon.
I really feel like, yeah, like I understand what he's talking about, but I think I came into this thinking that this video is going to be about like literally like how to play Yu-Gi-Oh, like the basics. I really think he's talking about that next step, which does lack content, does lack help of you know the basics, right? Like I'm thinking of the people that I know who play Edison, play Go, or they're like now getting back into being interested in Genesis because they used to play and then advanced got to feel bad. And it's like, okay, why? Right? Like you understood all the mechanics, and yeah, they add in new mechanics, and some of them, I've heard were absolute horror stories. But like, how did it go from feeling fun to feeling so miserable that you didn't want to play? And I feel like it's that middle part of like, how do you interact? How do you free up the cognitive space in your brain to start thinking about what the other person is doing? But I feel like, again, that requires all the groundwork of really knowing your stuff and knowing your basics and knowing your rulings and knowing what a card can do. And then, and I do feel like and then, like, we don't, where's the guide for that? Like, where's the guide for how to identify the one card starter? Where's the guide for how to use a board breaker versus it just like explaining what the card does? Like, how do you actually like go into a board?
Or how to exceed them. And it's like, sure, you need to know that, but in reality, it's going to be happening kind of regardless. Like, the more important thing I feel to know about these cards is like what's got to be stopped, what does not need to be stopped. So that's where I think that a lot of modern Yu-Gi-Oh guides are not perhaps serving people properly. So a couple of disclaimers here before I talk about what I would like to maybe do about this. This isn't to say that like Yu-Gi-Oh guides are wrong or that people who are making these guides are like totally they're off the mark and they don't get it and it's a way. No, these are good videos. I think that there's got to be some tutorial content somewhere. But I'm thinking that maybe the better way to be teaching Yu-Gi-Oh is to almost give it the metaphor like sometimes people use the metaphor of a fighting game. I don't know if that like maps perfectly cleanly, but some people say Smash Bros, some people say Tekken. I don't really know. The point is though is I think that people should maybe be framing Yu-Gi-Oh as more of like a push and pull where cards roles are more so defined by like how they interact with the push and the pull. Is it a push card, right? Is it a card that starts a combo, extends a combo, right? Like ends a combo? Or is it
Okay, that just gave me the memory of when I was first starting to learn to play. I learned on Pearly, and then Juhu came out, and I was super stoked on Cupsy. Um, and so I wanted to play like the Yummy deck, right? And so when I was trying to learn to play it, the amount of people who'd be like, "Yo, let me show you a combo video," sped up Master Duel combo video, and like I get it if you've been playing for a long time, like you understand what's happening. I was watching that and I was like, "What am I supposed to get from this?" What? And they're like, "Oh, you do this," and or there were so many people who were like, "You just got to practice your combo," and I feel like that idea of like practice your combo, learn your combo, they would just have me like practice it over and over. And there is merit in that. But I was still so new that the minute I sat down and you interrupted my combo, I didn't know what to do. I was like, I only know how to. That was memorization, not learning. There's a difference between memorizing and understanding and learning. You can know what your times tables are, but do you understand how it relates to repeated addition? And can you actually show what is happening with like 7 times 5 versus 5 times 7? Like, do you understand? Memorization of combos, I feel like gets so over pushed when you're learning Yu-Gi-Oh instead of actual genuine learning. And those videos of the combos are not meant for new players. My opinion, they're not meant for new players because I don't know what's happening on that screen. There's a bunch of colors and there's a bunch of sounds and things are moving, and then people would look at me and be like, "You got it?" And I was like, "No, I know I don't got it."
a defensive card that is meant to impede a combo, slow a combo down? And remember that the goal isn't even so much to like freeze the combo entirely most of the time, but more so to just to stop it, to mitigate it. Or maybe like you could describe a card like a Drolin Lockbird or a Dimension Shifter or an Artifact Lancia as more of a halting the combo type of thing. Maybe you could say that board breakers are sort of like reversal cards. Nibiru is something of a reversal card. Dark Ruler No More and Forbidden Droplet, maybe Triple Tactics Talent. You could call these reversal cards in some form or fashion. Anyway,
That also just gave me the thought of how so much like there's like staple cards. I just had the thought of making a video around like staple cards that you're most likely to see, because that's another issue I feel like with Yu-Gi-Oh is that we have to also be honest with people. If you're going to play advanced, you need to play something meta, right? You can't just pick up your favorite pet deck and assume you're going to go and sit down. Like I feel like the more off meta you play, the better of a player you have to be. And that's another thing of like you can know a lot of the mechanics and you can know Yu-Gi-Oh, that doesn't make you a good player. I feel like those are two different skills. Okay, those are two different skills. And so not being able to just pick up your pet deck and like go and sit down because you're gonna probably get stumped. Um, because there's so many, like the card pool right now. Yes, you technically could play whatever, and you're gonna see some like random stuff, and there's benefit to that because then your opponent doesn't know where to hand trap you. So you might get a one off, right? If you sit down and you do play something super off meta and your opponent doesn't know what's happening. But once they figure it out, they're gonna be, if they're a good player, they're gonna figure out where to stop you. But going over cards like the cards he just listed. Like if you're a new player, and that's what people would also like, people would just say card names at me. And I know sometimes I do it in my Learn to Play series too, because I get it. It's hard, like once you have the knowledge to not just like bleh, talk about Ash Blossom. But if you know what the most common cards are currently in the meta, like all three of those cards are things like you should know what Nib is, what Droplets is, Ash, Imperm, Ghost Spell, like just thinking of cards that you're more likely to see and reviewing what they are, because that's also going to help free up the cognitive space in your brain, because once you know what those cards do, you're going to see them in your deck. You're going to see them in other people's decks too.
This is all very off the dome, so I'm sorry if it sounds like you're just saying, I'm just talking in circles and saying a bunch of stuff. What I'd like to do personally is try my own hand at a bit of a Yu-Gi-Oh guide, but I'm not entirely sure where to start. I just know that I would sort of like a framework that does a better job of telling people the importance of cards and what to be looking out for in cards. In a game where so much can come at you at once, I think it's actually more helpful to be able to just identify the general roles that a card fills regardless of the deck, because that way when you're facing the different things, you'll be able to kind of go fall back on this set of fundamentals, and that might help people learn Yu-Gi-Oh better. But there are some concerns, right? Like you still got to get through the fundamentals somehow. Like I'm talking the bare basics. Then there's still decks that break the rules, things that cheat mechanics. So I don't know how to like fit all of that in there, but I have been just brainstorming and workshopping my own take on a modern Yu-Gi-Oh guide. I don't know what the best way to even present that sort of thing would be, but that's sort of where you guys come come in. Oh gosh, I'm dying. This video needs to end soon. That's kind of where you guys might come in. Like when it comes to teaching Yu-Gi-Oh, what do you think is really the best approach, right? Like when it comes to how you explain hand traps, how you explain starter cards, how you explain board breaking or find.
So I don't think my approach is necessarily like the best, but I do think I try to approach it from the lens of teaching and the idea of, I really think the best approach is chunking and trying to really only teach the one concept. So before you can talk about like the chain. So when I was learning Yu-Gi-Oh, I would ask a question, right? I would ask a question about what I've learned was like an on summon effect. And then they would start explaining all these other tangents, because it is very interrelated, but like you can't just focus on like the one thing, and then once they know the one thing, you can make the connection to the other thing. um I do think what he's talking about, there is a big need in the community for it. I think he's more talking about the how to be better at playing a game of Yu-Gi-Oh, how to feel successful playing Yu-Gi-Oh, because I feel like my series is more of really just like, what are the basics, what do these things do, how can you learn these things, so when you sit down in a game you understand more what's happening and you can start making those connections with all of the things. But that doesn't mean that you're, again, like I said, I think being a skilled player and a player who wins matches is different. And I really had to let go of this idea that being good at Yu-Gi-Oh meant winning. I think it doesn't. It takes so much time, because that's a different skill. Like I can understand, and I know of people who understand the game of Yu-Gi-Oh. They know what their cards are doing, they know what their opponent's cards are doing, they have a lot of good card knowledge, a lot of the basics down. That doesn't make them a skilled player. That is like a whole other thing. And I feel like that's what he's talking about, of like, how do you start building skill so you feel successful in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh, because people are more likely to stick with something that they feel successful at versus constantly thinking you're going to start the car and the train comes.
Like bottlenecks or choke points in combos, right? Like if you had to describe that to a person who doesn't really know anything, what would be your metaphors or analogies or just straight up explanations and definitions for like all these things? Like how do you just like define a starter, define, a choke point, define these different defensive cards and stuff? I'd like to know, because I'm thinking about this stuff. I really am. So please feel free to weigh in the comments. Again, I apologize if this was one of these like all over the place discussions, but it's stuff I think about. I'm always interacting with people and hearing what people want. Maybe what I'm thinking of isn't even like a beginner's guide. Maybe it's more of like a improvement guide. I don't really know. But regardless, that's been the video. My voice is about to give out, so I will just cut it here and say,
Yeah, huge shout out to the person in my Discord who recommended that video. I think it's a great conversation that needs to be had. I fully agree with so many of the things that he was saying. I really think it is, though, the idea of the basics, right? And then like the how to be better. And that's the thing for me. Like, I do not feel playing under a year. I cannot answer the questions of like how you can play into other decks. I don't have the experience for it. Like, there's still so much that, like, that's what I'm saying. Like, I can know my punctuation. I can know my triggers. I can know my different types of effects. I can know my inherent summons. I can know how to do all the different extra deck summons. That doesn't mean that I am skillful enough to sit down in a game and not feel super overwhelmed. I feel like that is a skill I'm now building of how do I sit down in a game? How do I compete? How do I have a chance? How do I not just get fully wombo comboed on, even though I used my hand traps, but they were at the wrong time? How do you know when it's at the wrong time? And I feel like that is something that I don't know where to go to like find help for that. But I feel like that is stuff that does take community members who have been playing long enough to really try to like explain it. So huge fan of the idea of like just helping more people want to play the game. I really love the game. Does it make me cry sometimes? Yeah, but I think that's a thing. Like for me, there's just such a. I was someone who, if I wasn't immediately good at something as a kid, I just didn't touch it. I was like a typical gifted child who was like, everything comes so easy to me. And then so the minute something didn't come easy to me, I was like, no, thank you. And so Yu-Gi-Oh has really challenged that part of me that doesn't want to just try. And so it's really satisfying when you finally get it. But yeah, I mean, I'm hopeful that my videos are helpful to people and that we can get more people learning how to play and understanding those basics and making the connections. And then I think we do need, like what he was saying, I think it really is more like an improvement guide versus a how to play guide. Um, anyway, let's say bye to Alphonse. Come here. Come here. Come here. We gotta get ready for today. We got things to do. We got things to do. Oh my goodness. Okay, say bye. Say bye to the people. Any words? Wisdom. Pure wisdom from you today. Okay, we'll see you next time. Bye.